Yeah, so the talk, Warren said, oh, you should give a talk. And I had no idea what to talk about, so I thought about the last time I was here, and I thought about a talk that was given by, unfortunately I don't remember which guy, but a guy from Toca, Boca.
Bjorn Jeffery.
Bjorn, okay. I'll try to remember that name further later in this talk when I mention it again.
Yeah.
And it sort of got me thinking, and so I called it fiction versus nonfiction, but actually that's not really what it's about, because it evolved. So anyway, I'm going to start with just extremely quick whirlwind, like where am I coming from? So many decades ago, I founded a company with Stephen Wolfram, Wolfram Research. This is a very, very serious company. It makes like completely non-fiction everything, metaphorically speaking, hardcore technical computing software. But then after a while, I kind of got involved in this silly enterprise of periodic table, table in shape of a periodic table. It just got out of hand. I started doing different things. Started publishing posters. These things are almost completely non-functional. The only time we ever had a meeting at the table, the guy on the right here picked up a hunk of silicon and dropped it and broke a key on his keyboard, and we didn't ever have meetings at it again. So it's very different sort of flavor of, not so serious, more about let's just make it fun and interesting and pretty and attractive. And, not that there's anything wrong with that. This book has done very well. Very happy with it. Also Wolfram Research. I mean, there's two sides of things. Anyway, so that book actually led to the Elements app, which led to the founding of Touch Press. And as you heard earlier today, that's when things became complicated. So, was it 6 years ago, I founded Touch Press along with Max Whitby and Stephen Wolfram and John Crummy. And we made a whole bunch of apps. Somewhere halfway in between, Touch Press as 2 words became Touch Press as 1 word because we had a marketing person. I actually never really liked that, modernizing of the name or whatever, because I really liked the allusion to the old, press is the name of an old publishing company. But anyway, now it's 1 word. Then I kind of left, and Touch Press became Theo. And then, as if by magic, Touch Press became Touch Press again with 2 words, back to the way the name should have been. But it's a completely different Touch Press. And so now we have the situation where if you go to touchpress.com, you see my name on the front page of touchpress.com. But it's a company I have absolutely nothing to do with it. For example, my name tag says Chief Creative Officer of Touch Press. That's completely not true. I have no association with them at the moment. Maybe that will change, I don't know, but at the moment, it's a completely different company, which has sort of, in a marvelous wet fashion, stepped in and snatched my apps away from what could have been an unpleasant fate for them, and given them what I feel like is probably a very nice new home. And the new home being the Touch Press Media division of Touch Press, which looks an awful lot like the old Touch Press. It kind of feels like home here on this page. So anyway, that's my side of the confusion about what happened with Touch Press. Anyway, on to the question, fiction versus nonfiction. So, like I say, this reminded me of a talk that was given a couple years ago, and it sort of made me think about just how different my job is from Toca Boca's job. I'm using these words fiction, nonfiction very metaphorically, sort of. Fiction is when you just kind of, you have a blank slate, you just make stuff up. And nonfiction is where there's just certain things you can't change, like that is law. Obviously there are fiction and nonfiction books, there are also fiction and nonfiction apps, and accounting, and elections, and various other things can be done either way. And so then I was thinking about an exercise I learned about when I was working on the Disney animated app. I don't know, I guess this is something that they do at Disney. You kind of, it's like an exercise in coming up with stories. So you have, the teacher or whatever, somebody sets a scenario. Go get some milk. Comes back with no milk and missing their shoe. Okay, so what happened? And the exercise is try to make up something to go in between to explain, and you can sort of iterate this. I think this would make a fun app. You could have a little drawing app where each person would contribute a new step. And this sort of notion of adding complications and plot twists and making the story more interesting and more intricate and that's the hard part of fiction. You have to kind of make up all this stuff to try to make an interesting story arc. This is exactly the opposite of what I spend almost all of my time doing. What I try to do is remove that sort of complexity from real-world situations. Like maybe you have, an app or an old-style application, whatever, and it's got a complicated user interface, and you're trying to figure out what are all the complications and plot twists in this design that we could take out and smooth over and get from point A to point B in the simplest way possible. Sometimes that's sort of a software issue. Sometimes it's how do you explain this difficult concept to somebody in a way that makes sense? How can we find unifying and simplifying principles that let you get through a difficult topic? So truth is stranger than fiction. Yes. Also, truth is much more complicated and more difficult to understand than fiction. In sort of the forefront of research, whatever, it really is like at the limits of human comprehension what you're trying to understand about the real world. In the context of education, you're trying to teach people things that are at the very limits of their comprehension. The student in that context is really stretching themselves to try to, get a concept. And, the last thing you want to do is add any complexity to that. The natural situation is already plenty complicated enough to start with. And your struggle is actually to try to find simple, short, direct ways to communicate. So how does this sort of apply to apps? Well, pure games, original games are, they're pure fiction. You get to make up anything you want. Not that that's easy. I mean, that's difficult. You have to make stuff up. But having made up, some gameplay, some mechanics, some set of characters, you can then, fine-tune it, delete. Like you have, let's say you decide, I have too many characters in my story. Well, you can take one out. You get to do that. You can change facts. In nonfiction, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to. You have a certain information that you need to communicate, and there's certain facts you just can't ignore, which is what got me started on this particular talk, is the notion that franchise games are actually nonfiction games in that sense. Because if you're stuck with a franchise character, there's certain things that they may not do. And then that limits the gameplay. And what Bjorn, was talking about was how difficult that made the job of the game designer sometimes, because you're sort of eliminating one degree of freedom that you would otherwise have in making the game better. Obviously, there are countervailing advantages, as we heard in the last talk, and as even Bjorn would acknowledge. But that bit of intrusion of sort of, quote, nonfiction into the design of the game is an issue, even for things which, really are basically still fiction. If you're actually trying to make a, quote, educational app where you're trying to communicate a large body of complicated information, that becomes sort of the dominant factor in trying to make the app work, is how do we get all of this information, so that you're trying to layer that on top of preconceived gameplay. The result is often unsatisfactory. And it's depressing how often people, the solution that they find to this problem, how do we fit all this nonfiction information, this factual information about the world into the constraints of our game, is to apply the technique of fiction, otherwise known as, let's just dumb it down, let's just leave that out, ignore that, force fit it into context. And people even do this with physical products. If you don't want to have that many holes on the outside of your device, well, just leave them out. You don't need a headphone jack. You don't need to have a mouse that you can charge and use at the same time. This is like using the techniques of fiction in what really should be a nonfiction context. And what what you ought to do in these situations is work harder to try to figure out how to make these non-optional parts fit together cleanly, and it's difficult. That's the hard part of nonfiction. The hard part of fiction is you have to invent it all or steal it from somebody else. But you have this kind of limitless freedom, and the creative constraint is the need to come up with everything. In the nonfiction world, the creative constraint is you really can't change that stuff, and you need to communicate it, and you have to try to figure out how to make it all work together. And dumbing down is not the way to go. But what are we supposed to do? How can we take these difficult subjects, and aren't they inherently boring? And shouldn't learning be easy? Isn't that the job of an app designer, is to make difficult subjects easy and give people gold stars for doing well in them? Isn't this the goal? Okay, no. Easy is not the goal. And I'm going to tell you why. I mean, easy, it doesn't work. Nothing easy is interesting. And kids know this. Kids invent difficulty out of thin air when there is none. I don't know if any of you have kids about this high or shorter. They've probably spent the last 2 or 3 weeks flipping bottles. It's this bottle flipping thing, trying to get it to land a certain way. And as soon as they get it to land a certain way, they will then increase the difficulty level to make it harder. Are difficult video games boring? No. The most popular video games in the world are incredibly hard. It takes days, weeks of intense work to get anywhere in these things. Minecraft has no externalized rewards at all. It's the most successful game of all time. You can't earn gold stars. You just can't. What happened here? It's and even some of the games that have points and scores and things. Really, they're more about leveling up, which I think is more sort of accomplishment than empty rewards. How about walls of text? It's boring to have just screen after screen of text. Tell that to the richest woman in England. Harry Potter is 1 million words of text. Nothing. It's a wall of text 1 million words long, which 8-year-olds binge read. Easy is not the thing that is really pulls people in and makes them stick with it. This is the kind of stuff that is actually both more popular and much harder than what most apps try to do. Spelling bees, right? What kid is going to work hard to get into an easy spelling bee? You want the hardest one that you can do. It's the marketing message is, this is really hard. You have to work at it, and you will accomplish something. When I see this, and I hope there's nobody from BK here, but it was just a random thing. I just Googled math is easy, and this is the first one that came up. So, but what is it like? If you hand a kid this thing that says math is easy, what are you communicating to them? Number one, I think you're stupid. I got this extra easy stuff that you could do because you're obviously not smart enough to do anything hard. You don't need to work on this. You don't need to put effort into it. It's easy. And by the way, if you finish it, whoop-dee, you just finished something easy. Great. You can't accomplish something if the task that's been set is described ahead of time as easy. So why do people do this? Well, sometimes you want an easy way out. If you're not interested in or don't respect the problem, you just want to get it over with. My refrigerator broke. I just want it fixed. I really don't care how. I want it fixed. So the other thing this communicates is the adults around you think math is boring. They don't like math and they want to avoid it. That's what you're telling people when you give them something that says math is easy. And this is really bad. This is how you end up with fewer and fewer scientists and the 2016 election. What we need is to apply this kind of thinking Like this is what we are trying to do, is give people something hard to chew on. Embrace the reality. You know, math is hard. History is complicated. These things are not easy. And kids will respond to that. But how, you say? You know, because very often they don't. They just kind of say, oh, that's hard, I don't want to do that. So we can learn from, you know, how this is done in different contexts. For example, game designers. Okay, so I had this conversation with Warren last night. I mean, game designers are really good at hooking people. If you look at you know, the mathematics involved with onboarding and the effort reward, they have these sort of multi-dimensional surfaces and effort reward curves, and just exactly, you know, how much Pavlovian endorphin reinforcement you need to give at what moment to, you know, both suck people in, but then also keep them challenged, because, you know, it has to be easy at first, but then it has to be a little more difficult later on. It has to, you know, just hit the right moments. And slot machines that used, you know, did this mathematical optimization first, it's, you know, so that the payout schedules will keep you going. You know, but this has been refined to a high art in the games and app world, which is, you know, which is evil if you're using it for the purpose of wasting kids' time or taking their money. But it's also, it's just a tool. And so this is a little, are we actually seeing? Yeah. Yeah, so this is a little, this is an example of exactly the same techniques being used by Master Young on the left there. So I happen to have brought 4 kids to Taekwondo for the first time. And it was really interesting to watch how he used what is essentially a game-like onboarding experience to get them hooked. Because when you go to Taekwondo, like, this is serious business. You are going to show up, you're going to respect your parents, you're going to work hard, you're going to commit to doing this for a year. But you can't lead with that. You know, you bring them in, you let them have fun. In the 3rd lesson, they get to break a board. That's a big deal. That's like level up. In this particular lesson, it was the kid on the left got to lead the class for a little while because he was doing really well. This is, you know, it's exactly the same kinds of techniques applied in a real world situation to hook people and draw them in and get them to commit to making an effort. You know, good writing. I always use Harry Potter as an example just because it's the most extreme recently, but, you know, there have been any number of books or book series like this that captured a generation of kids. Not with how easy it is to read them, but with, wow, this book is 2 inches thick. I'm going to finish it in, you know, 48 hours straight without putting it down or whatever. It's called good writing. And when you know, you sort of use these techniques of understanding what gets people hooked for good, then it's a good thing. So, you know, these kinds of principles can be used in nonfiction writing and nonfiction app design. It's slightly harder because you don't get to just make stuff up. And a big part of, you know, the way in which it's done in the games world is you have this freedom of making stuff up and adjusting the curves exactly. But you do have the advantage of getting to tell people about the real world. And kids are endlessly fascinated with the real world. They really want to learn about, you know, giant trucks and dinosaurs and, you know, all this real stuff. I think kids are kind of, you know, biologically programmed to want to figure out how to, you know, find their place in the world. How does this place work? It's very confusing. You know, reality is a strong hook to get people interested. And, you know, I think if you find yourself in a situation wanting to make an app like this, and your first reaction is, this material is not really very interesting, it's math and that's boring, whatever, what we just heard in the last talk is very relevant. Find somebody who's passionate about that subject. You've got to really care about it and respect the material, because that's how you'll make it interesting. So, you know, in my particular work, you know, the things that I find interesting are there's 2 things. Is that playing? Oh, I probably have to. What do I have to do to make it play? There we go. There's two things that I primarily work with. One is fire, and the other is beauty. Fire, because fire is big and powerful, and when something blows up, kids are interested. Kids want to know about big, powerful things that change the world. And beauty, because it's just sort of, well, I think it's more beautiful on a better screen, but because it's something we know how to do, and because it's kind of it's instantly recognizable as sort of attractive, and it draws people in. So here are my 5 points of how to think like a game designer in presenting nonfiction material. And since I write mostly, I'm thinking about writing. So number 1, you have to hook people. This is something that I wrote a column for 10 years for Popular Science magazine, every month, like 1 page. And my editor would be like, he was always saying, you know, you've got 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences. And if somebody's at the newsstand and they pick up the Popular Science and they randomly open it, and if they happen to open to your page, you've got to sell the magazine. Like, now it's your responsibility that first sentence or 2 on your page has got to get them to not put it back on the shelf, but take it with them. So, you know, you have to, you know, give them something. And because in that context, all we have is text and some pictures, I think the thing that you can give them is an insight about the world that they didn't have before. You know, tell them something that you didn't know, or at least tease them with the fact that you're going to find that out by the end of the article. Because, you know, understanding the world is inherently interesting, and you can hook people that way. The other thing that's really important is, I call it insights per minute, or, you know, actual sort of brain-stimulating bits of information per minute. You need to keep people like feeling like they're getting something out of it, as opposed to slogging through. You know, keep it coming. So terse, efficient writing is really important, not just because it's sort of, quote, good writing, but because it keeps the brain occupied and stuff keeps coming. Number 3, teach the children about the world. They want to know this stuff. They want to know, how do I grow up? How do I advance? How do I get past? You know, this works in, you know, game contexts. You're always trying to like figure out, what is it that I have to learn about this game world in order to level up? Well, kids are doing that about the real world all the time. They're biologically programmed to figure out, how do I level up in the real world? You can knock that out of them. Schools try very hard, and some of the sort of math made easy, you know, that genre of approaching kids, it does its darndest to try to damp down and push away the natural curiosity that kids have and their natural desire to learn. You can ruin it, you know, and it happens, but it's there to start with, and if you tap into it instead of sort of pushing it away, I think that works. Wait, we went ahead 1. Right, provide a challenge. Right, so it ultimately has to be difficult, because otherwise it's not rewarding. And it's something that game designers understand very well. Start easy, but then if it continues being easy, that's just boring. It very quickly becomes boring, you throw it away. It has to get harder and harder. That's one reason why ultimately multiplayer games are the ones that are really capture people the longest, because in the long run, it's only another human being trying to kill you that can actually provide the level of challenge that an expert player needs. And this is well understood by in the companies that design those games, that you need to have the community of player killers whose goal is to kill the newbies. Because if you don't have those people, the thing doesn't remain interesting enough to your hardcore audience. Anyway, we don't have to go that far. You don't actually need to have human adversaries in your educational app trying to kill the players, but and the most important thing about challenges is that they be real and organic, by which I mean related to the fact that the material that you're trying to teach is inherently difficult. You don't have to add a bunch of gimmicks and artificial made-up, gameplay type challenges. The challenge is in trying to understand the complicated concepts. Simulation environments, sandbox type games are excellent at that. Get this thing to work, get this machine to work, get this circuit to work, get this program to work coding education is a great example of this. Anyway, there's no need to make up these sort of artificial challenges. You're trying to teach people hard stuff. And what they're there for, what they should be there for if you set things up right, is overcoming the challenges of comprehension, which is tremendously satisfying. The word is mastery, and that's what kids hunger for. That's a bigger endorphin push than anything else you can possibly give them, is the sense of accomplishment. And I don't know how many of you know about the bottle flipping thing. It's apparently completely crazy and worldwide. And if you have a kid with access to a half-full bottle of water, they will try to flip it. And when they get it to land, after 3 hours of nonstop trying, it lands on the cap or something. There's just nothing that can replace that. And the same thing applies to just sort of the joy of finally figuring it out. I get it now. That makes sense. That's much more powerful than, wow, I got a high score on this. I got 300 points on this. Those are externalized artificial rewards. And it works to a certain level, but it's destructive. And ultimately, I think kids, for the most part, see through it. So, in summary, fiction, you have this limited possibility, but nonfiction has a trump card. It's real. It's the real world. Okay, and now we're going to arrive at my sappy closing slide. It lets you win at life. This is the real world. It's not a game. And that resonates, I think, with kids very powerfully. They care about the real world, or at least they want to, if you haven't beaten it out of them. There you go. Thank you.